Good morning, everybody. Welcome to meeting number 11 of the Region 6 Steering Committee. We have a lot to discuss today, so in short order, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Gordon to call the roll. Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All righty. From Ascension, David Wheel. Oh, wow. David, you with us? All right. And from Assumption, John Boudreau. I saw John on.
I'm here.
Thank you, John. Now, BetNet, Andrew Barron told me that he wouldn't be able to make it today unless we do have somebody from BetNet proxying for him. Thank you. Iberia Parish, Scott Sonier. Scott Sonier, all right. And from Iberville, John Clark. John, you with us? John Clark. All right. And from Jefferson Parish, either Michelle Gonzalez, Michelle?
Michelle's here.
Good, thank you, Michelle. And from Lafourche, Amanda Wazan.
Hey, Pat, I'm here.
Thank you, Amanda. And from the city of New Orleans, do we have the New Orleans representative on? Thank you.
Theo Sanders?
Theo Sanders, but I believe that he got off. Plaquemine, Mike Metcalf. Point Coupé, Mark Ward.
I'm here.
Mark, you with us?
Yes, sir.
He's here.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And St. Charles, Earl III.
I'm here.
Thank you, Earl. And from St. James, Merrill McCary.
Here.
Thank you. Great. St. John the Baptist, Devin Boyle.
Good morning, I'm here.
Thank you, Devin. From St. Martin, Casey Corville.
I'm here.
Thank you, Casey. And from St. Mary Parish, Tim Mott. And
He's
Terrebonne, Mr.
I'm here.
Mark Black is here. And West Baton Rouge Parish, Kevin Devitt.
Present, Pat.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Kevin. All right, you have a quorum, Mr. Chairman. And I tell you what, let me go through the ones that were absent, see if anybody jumped on late. Ascension, David Wow. Scott Sonier with Iberia Parish. John Clark with Iberville. City of New Orleans, Theo Sanders. Plaquemine, Mike Metcalf. And St. Mary,
Tim's here.
Tim's here?
Mhm.
Tim, you with us?
He put in the chat box.
Okay, Tim's on the chat box. Thank you. All right, I'll put him down as present. Okay, so that's great. All right, so we only have 5 absent. Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, Pat.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is review and adoption of the minutes of the February 24th, 2021 meeting. I believe Mr. Gordon has sent those out to you previously. Hope you had a chance to review them. I did, so I'm going to entertain a motion to approve the minutes as they are written.
John Boudreau, Assumption. So moved.
Thank you, John. Is there a second?
Mark Ward, Point P, I'll second.
Mark Ward seconds. Thank you. Any objections to the approval of the minutes? Hearing none. Thank you very much. The minutes are approved. The Next item is a presentation by the Louisiana Watershed Initiative people. I have Steve Piku here on the agenda, so Steve, if you're there, this is a long-term funding presentation to the steering committee. Steve, you have the floor.
All right, I'm here. I'm glad to be here. Get my setup working for y'all. For those of you who are on the video part, are you seeing the main slide now, everybody that's using video?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, well then I'll get started. Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Steve Piku. A little background on me. I'm from Eunice, Louisiana. I was born on Mardi Gras Day, and my family's been here for centuries. With my partner, Grasshopper Mendoza, I'm a co-founder of the Louisiana Water Economy Network, and that's a group that was inspired by the work of David Wagner and the Dutch dialogues post-Katrina. We staged 75 meetings over 9 years in support of integrated water management as key to the economic, environmental, and social future of Louisiana. We were also co-founders of the Water Challenge Entrepreneurial Competition. We managed it for its first 4 years for Greater New Orleans Foundation and the Idea Village. And for 6 years, we represented Louisiana at the EPA Water Cluster Leaders Meeting, which are held annually at the WEFTEC conference. And that gave us a chance to interact with global water leaders who are really focused on the economic power of water, not just on all the other issues that we know we're all dealing with water, but how can we transform our relationship with water into a much more productive one. And it's very informative, and it very much underlies a lot of the things I'm going to talk to you about today. Additionally, my economic development background, I spent 12 years as the assistant director of the now defunct Louisiana Music Commission, which was an agency within the state's economic development department. Then post-Katrina, I spent about 5 years working for the LSU Ag Center as a housing agent focused on building back stronger after storms and floods, really focused on building science, but also on economic development. I was tasked with nurturing the green economy. So it's really exciting to be a part of this initiative, because this is a systems-oriented initiative that hopefully will not just lead us to a more resilient Louisiana, but to a more thriving state, a place where we live well with water. First, I want to set the stage for y'all a little bit and help you do what I call getting right with water. Water is our most vital resource. Without it, life is impossible. Without it, economics are impossible. And its interaction with the world and with us has been going on for 4 billion years. The water that makes up 70% of your body has coursed through the cells of countless living things since the dawn of time, and it connects us to the history of the planet. We're made of this place. We're made of everything here, and water is the thing that we really need to get. I'd like to think it's like building a better relationship, but it's deeper than that. So I want to help you reframe your work a little bit, because in reframing the work, you'll see more economic possibilities. We really tend to take water for granted. We don't always recognize its roles, its power. We really, we have an abundance of it here. Obviously, this initiative is based on the fact that sometimes we have way too much of it, but it's actually a gift to have an abundance of water. Texas would take all our water if they could. All the western states would draw the Mississippi River dry if they could. So we need to manage it better. We need to value it. We need to measure it. You can't manage what you don't measure. We really don't tend to do this in Louisiana because we've been lulled by its abundance. So in helping you frame this, I want to help you kind of reframe how you're able to look at the financing side of this and be more prepared to bring the money in. Being flood ready is also going to mean being fund ready. And there are so many opportunities. The Louisiana water economy is something that is very near and dear to my heart. I did my thesis work at UNO focused on this and focused on what are Louisiana's opportunities, what is Louisiana's water cluster, and how does it compare to the water clusters around the world. And it was a really deep dive into innovation and entrepreneurship, and just how broadly the world is addressing our water issues. We're connected to a global movement here in being systems oriented and working on watershed systems as a critical part of understanding how to work with water. The water economy really covers the Louisiana economy. In 2017, my partner Grasshopper and I released a paper that focused on how can we develop and nurture a water economy. And we more clearly identified it in that paper than in my thesis. We identified these 7 economic sectors. And what's important for us in looking at the funding dilemma is addressing how do we bring these sectors to the table. This isn't just about public servant responsibility, and as a former public servant for almost 20 years with the state, I know how hard you all work, and I know how many hats you have to wear. But we really need to bring the private sector into this. We need to bring these economic sectors together, and we need to bring us together through water. These are our neighbors. These are our colleagues. These are the constituents of everything that we do around here. And right now, we don't have everybody at the table. So the water economy potential of the work you do, every dollar you spend for flood risk reduction is foundational to the economy. And so we really want to think more broadly, and really everybody's doing economic development, whether they appreciate it or not. Our research approach was to look around the country for best practices for long-term funding for watershed-oriented flood risk reduction. And I can tell you there's not a lot of people out there doing watershed-oriented flood risk reduction. And that's an opportunity for us. That puts Louisiana at the forefront of something really important that's actually happening globally as we all look more holistically at water. Excuse me. We looked at the enabling legislation. We looked at equity. We looked to see if these funding sources were stable and recurring, what kind of authorizations might be required. And then we really tried to see, well, does this make sense for Louisiana? So the paper is not a catalog. The paper is really a condensed set of stories about where people are doing things that could inspire us and could help us think this through a little more. Not everything that's in here is something we can do tomorrow, but we think everything in this paper can be done. And some of them need to be done at the state level. Some of them can be done at the local level. We identified things that could be done by the smallest communities all the way up to the state. And all of them bring in money. And in fact, in combination, these strategies can bring in a lot of money, but it's going to take all of them. One of the key things about this is that it's an all hands approach. We have to weave a funding quilt. And I know that amongst this region, some of the parishes have been very proactive in recognizing that they need to just take charge of some of these things. I know down in Terrebonne and Lafourche, y'all have been very proactive about managing your water resources and investing in your flood protection systems. It's an inspiration for everybody. We all need to be that engaged right now in this discussion. We all need to weave this quilt together. So the first thing I want to talk to y'all about are user fees and the potential revenue we have from this. Approximately 8 billion gallons a day of water are withdrawn from surface and groundwater resources in the state of Louisiana right now. And the only region we identified that was really paying close attention to this is the Capital Region, because I'm sure if you've kept up with the news, they have issues of the aquifer being overdrawn and threatening with saltwater intrusion that could really contaminate it. Well, it turns out Louisiana's aquifers are very stressed, some of the most stressed in the nation. And WWNO just did a whole 5-part series on that I hope you get a chance to learn from. If we put a price on that water, we can bring in a lot of money for the state of Louisiana and for all of us to do this kind of work. The prices across the country range from $6 per million gallons to, in California, as high as $123 per million gallons. In the capital region, they are currently charging $20 per million gallons. Prior to that, they were charging 10. So we just used the $10 math as sort of an easy place to do some projections. And we arrived at approximately $30 million a year could be coming in if we were paying for using water, if we were paying for that extraction of water. And it can be done equitably and fairly, but we think it needs to really be looked at. We're not alone in proposing that. The Legislative Auditor's Office and others who've looked at this have urged us to value water, put a price on it, and then make sure when you take it, you put it back better than you found it, at least as good as you found it. We don't do that very well either. Stormwater utilities are the next thing we want to emphasize, because this is one of the easiest tools in the toolbox. This is basically communities assessing a fee on the amount of impervious surfaces. You know, the watershed in a hydro modified environment, which all our watersheds have been impacted by us now, the watershed literally starts with you. And I know y'all have a really strong outreach program, and I looked at your talking points, and it's very, very impressive, the work y'all are doing. This is one thing that I don't know that everybody realizes, but what you use in your house, what you do to your yard and your property becomes part of the watershed. And so this responsibility extends to each one of us. And a stormwater utility shares that responsibility for the operations and maintenance of stormwater divisions and of flood protection at the community level. And this can be done by even the smallest community. We identified a town of 5,500 in North Carolina, ironically called Nashville, that is collecting a modest fee of about $30 a year per household. And it's raising enough money to run their stormwater division. At the same time, Nashville, Tennessee, which is 6.8 million people, is raising $34 million annually with a $6 a month fee per household or per residential unit. That's approximately 2,500 square feet. If you have a larger property, you can adjust those fees to match it. We think, and EPA says this is the most equitable and stable approach for doing direct funding where you are to get your stormwater managed. A really interesting thing we discovered was that Rhode Island was a great example of this, is that you can use a state infrastructure bank as a hub, as a clearinghouse, as a financial resource center. It has enormous potential to help you manage all the projects in a way that is treating the money in a consistent manner and providing consistent resources to the planners, to the people out in the field who are doing this work. It gives you a place to turn to and say, I only have a piece of this puzzle. Can you help me get more of this puzzle together? An infrastructure bank can help you do that. We have a mechanism in Louisiana through the Department of Transportation, but we don't know how well it's been utilized or if it's been considered for this. But when we looked at how this could play a catalytic role, as y'all well know, because it's in some of your documents, we're so fragmented, we're so siloed in the way we manage water in Louisiana. It's really important that we find a way to create some sort of clearinghouse that has a permanence and that is able to do all the really heavy lifting stuff we need to do. One of the things the infrastructure bank can do, and a lot of areas are doing, are green and environmental impact bonds. This is a relatively new tool. I mean, obviously bonds are a debt device. And when we first started this journey, we weren't sure that we were going to dig too deeply into this, but when we did, we found some very exciting news. And in fact, Louisiana has done this at least twice now, once for some coastal restoration work around Lake Charles area, and then here in New Orleans. The thing about green and environmental impact bonds is that it's a rapidly growing sector. It's a private and public sector bridge. And it's for people who are doing socially responsible investing, which has grown into a $1 trillion market globally. And people want to put their money where it's going to do good. And you can use these bonds to codify and prove that you're going to do things well. You can have a paper for performance model in these bonds, so that the performance of these projects is actually what's helping validate the value and generate the revenue for the people who invest in the bonds. But obviously, you get to use the bond money to do your projects. Another huge money area are the carbon markets. Louisiana has kind of held back from this, but even the industries here that were subject to this have long said, we want to know what is going to be the price of carbon. We're dealing with this around the world. We accept this. We know it's happening. Well, let us tell you about the ways it happens in which it generates revenue. There's an 11-state regional greenhouse gas initiative in the Northeast. Virginia just joined it last year. They started holding meetings and talking about, well, we think we're going to get about 40 million. We might get as much as 100 million from it. We're going to put 45% of that money into flood risk reduction and 25% of that money into addressing the needs of vulnerable communities at the same time. And then they got online and started holding webinars saying, we don't know how we're going to spend this money. Help us figure out how to spend this money well. And you can go online right now and see that. Well, just in the last 2 weeks, they held their first quarterly auction and they raised over $40 million in their first auction. Now, part of this is because the Biden administration on day one set a $51 price per ton for carbon for the assessment of all federal activities. Now, this is going to be woven into how projects are analyzed and funded. So the need for us to understand carbon impacts and to be able to factor some of these things in is going to come into play when you're dealing with federal agencies. So it's important that you gain more knowledge about this. But for Louisiana, as the 4th largest carbon emitter in the country, this could be an enormous source of income for us to do a lot of the work that we've long wanted to see done to remediate some of the impacts that a lot of these industries have created, particularly in our wetlands and in our waterways. And Governor Edwards' climate task force is working hard. They have so many incredible committees addressing these things. Stay in touch with these things. This could be a critical thing. We want to make sure, and they want to focus on coastal and flood risk reduction, coastal restoration, with the efforts at the climate task force that the governor's office is running. The other area that we see consistent revenue are property and sales taxes. We didn't go too much into sales taxes. Louisiana is the #1 state dependent upon sales taxes. It's not that it's a bad tool. It's a good tool for local things, but we have a disproportionate dependence upon them for our state systems. But with property taxes, Louisiana has the 4th lowest property taxes in the country. We also have a high poverty rate. We also have a high ALICE score. That's asset limited, income constrained, and employed. These are your just regular working people who are just barely getting by. All of our regions are challenged on a parish by parish basis where the ALICE scores in some cases are at 50%. So property taxes require a good tax base. And but where we are able to use them, and we have many districts around the state that do depend upon millages for water-related activities. We highlight the Bayou Vermilion district in particular because of the range of activities that they're funding with their millage. They're doing water management, but they're also doing outreach and education. They're doing economic development. They're doing native plant initiatives. They're building a welcome center with a LELAP certified laboratory for water quality testing. And water quality is so important. It's the tool that we can use to determine whether our projects are good. We have to make sure what we do doesn't impact water quality. It's really hard to clean water after you dirty it. And the thing about water quality, if it's good for water, it's good for us, it's good for the economy. If it's bad for water, it's bad for everything. And it's expensive to deal with. So they're really taking a very holistic approach. So we highlight them in the paper. And really, this presentation is about that paper. You should have access to it now. Take your time with it, read through it. Please click on those links. Those are the deeper dives where you can really gain some inspiration and some knowledge. Community-based public-private partnerships are critical to everything we do, and a lot of people are familiar with them and might have actually done some of these over the years. But it's a really important tool in our toolbox. and it's changing as we move towards nature-based solutions and green infrastructure. It's putting new models into place, even in the private sector. And in Milwaukee, they put out an RFP to do a really large green infrastructure initiative to manage an enormous amount of stormwater. They're on one of the Great Lakes, on a freshwater body. And so they are really concerned about the quality of their runoff. And so a company called Corvia stepped up and said, hey, look, we want to do this so badly, we'll put the money up front, and you can pay us based on how many stormwater gallons we keep out of the lake and clean. And so it's a performance-based contract. This is very transformative kind of stuff, and it sets a high bar for people in the private sector to get with these programs and develop these models. But hey, y'all, this is Louisiana. We can do this. We need these new business models. This is really about building a new future for all of us, and it's going to take all these tools, right? Mitigation banks and land trusts. A lot of y'all in this region have familiarity with it. There are mitigation banks in your region. There are land trusts that are working to preserve property. Look at those maps. Look at those banks. Try to see if you can connect these things to projects you're doing so you can leverage what's going on with these things. And look to these land trusts as again, pieces of a puzzle here, partners who can help you leverage, fill in the blanks on some of the things you're trying to do. Get to know these people, no matter what we do. Somebody said yesterday that they were so excited about the relationships they had developed with EPA, for example, and how helpful they had been. It's up in Washita. It's really about those relationships. And this is where it comes into play, where you need to know people who are doing these things and then get them on with the program to get inspired to work with you. A little known, apparently, tool in this toolbox for people doing water work is that the brownfield programs are able to do water related things. You're able to use brownfields money and the brownfields assistance to actually do water stuff. You don't have to just look at it as an industrial site that you want to put something else on and build a new building on. You can actually look at where are your brownfield sites. Are they adjacent to critical waterways? Are they adjacent to projects you might be working on, and can they be leveraged? LDEQ has a really great team of people to help you with this. If you don't know them, please do get to know them. Transportation funding, you know, DOTD has never been more cooperative in wanting to address their impacts on stormwater, and they're operating with a new range of tools themselves. The whole engineering world is operating with new tools. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has had a 10-year-long program called Engineering with Nature, for example. You can use your transportation projects to leverage your water management projects. Try to see where those connections are. We all know, we all have a lot of nonprofits operating in our regions. They can be your partners. In some cases, they can help consolidate some of the knowledge that you need to share. They can help you with outreach. Across the country, they're being used in different ways. It's an important tool in the toolbox, and they're important partners in what you do. We give some really good examples in the paper of a stormwater utility resource center in New Jersey that helps the communities there just get with the program. And you know, the stormwater utility is more than 1,700 of them across the country now. It's one of the fastest growing mechanisms for achieving funding. You can use a stormwater utility resource center in New Jersey too to gain information. It's right there for everybody to use. In Milwaukee, they focused on the economic development side of it. They've looked at their history as a brewing capital, but they also are the world's largest maker of hot water tanks and meters. And they have built a global reputation for their entrepreneurial work, and they're literally attracting businesses to co-locate in their water campus, which is everything on the water campus is innovative and pushing the envelope on water management, green infrastructure, even the fixtures on their efficiency and things like that. So what they've done is focused on water, and that's really a part of what I hope you'll do as you learn more about these things, is realize that if you focus on water and its potential and not just its threat, you're going to see more opportunities for funding. Hazard resistant building and development codes are absolutely essential, not only to protect life and property, but also to build our future. If we build to yesterday's standards, we're going to continue to have yesterday's problems. It's so critical that we build buildings that can survive and not only survive, but appreciate and value to keep our tax bases solid. This is one of those things that it's hard to find a negative in. It's nothing but positives. So consistent building codes applied broadly are going to strengthen our communities, make our communities more desirable and safer places to live, but also make them more insurable, also make them more investable. You know, the banks and the insurance companies and FEMA, everybody's looking at this and saying, if y'all aren't with the program, we're going to penalize you. We're not going to support you if you're not getting with it. So we really need to step up and support these building codes. Now, a lot of the work we're doing, because it's holistic, is really restorative in nature, right? I know when I was a kid, I had so many places to play. If you got a kid today, I don't know where you can take them that's either not posted no trespassing or just isn't there anymore. That's not just nature and the environment. From a financial standpoint, it's natural capital. And it is the part of our economy that enables the rest of our economy. The environment enables the economy. The environment enables us. We're a product of this planet. And when we invest in these programs that we're doing, we're creating assets that literally grow, literally make the world better. And we have a big task because we've disrupted. Every time we turn the dirt, we disrupt microbiomes and things that we're only beginning to understand. And so as we look at these things, we're trying to be more like nature. We're trying to look at these green infrastructure interventions as being regenerative. And we're really focusing on life, on being really life-giving in the work we do. And it's possible. And it's really such an essential driver. And it's also being measured differently. We actually have tools now to do benefit cost analysis that factor in these things, and they're available to you. They're linked in the paper, and they will help you design your projects in a way that they're going to get funded. And that's where there's a certain aspect of what you all do that has changed in ways that are for the better in a lot of ways. Globally, we're developing a common language of disasters, of recovery, of things like natural capital, of how we do water management. We're so not alone in trying to deal with flooding and the threat that water represents. We're just fortunate enough that we can look at the threat and the opportunities, see water not just as that threat, but as the asset that it is. But as we put these projects together, as we design our programs and our organizations, there's a common language available to us that's going to help you be found. During this pandemic, philanthropy has stepped up in ways that it hasn't before. And some of the things they've done is literally pushed money out to organizations that weren't even asking for it. Those organizations were discovered by data mining tools, by artificial intelligence, machine learning tools that are looking for keywords, that are looking for key phrases and metadata and descriptors that align, and that when they get them in there and measured out, they say, we know what they're doing. We need to help them do what they do. You have the ability to make your projects conform with these things. And these tools are available to anybody. They're online now. Even the design of our projects, there's assistance now available to you to design your projects in ways that are going to make them more likely to be funded. So it's a tool in your toolbox that it's something you can learn to do that's going to help you get the money you need. A big picture thing that this all connects to is the global transformation of economics in our economies. The circular economy is a movement that began more than a decade ago when some of the world's largest companies meeting at the World Economic Forum shared some data about the future. And that data was very scary. It told these companies that the way they were doing business could not continue, that we were going to run out of resources, that we were going to produce too many things that were useless to us, that our waste is getting out of control. And they looked to nature, and they looked to the circularity of nature and decided to call it the circular economy. We're linear thinkers. Our economic model right now is to take from the environment to make something. Oh, there's some byproducts that we throw away, and then we waste. And we're literally the only species on the planet that generates toxic waste, that generates waste that nothing can use. And that waste can get us in a lot of trouble. And it is. It's clogging our waterways. It's polluting our bodies. It's polluting our food chain. And so when we look at our operations, when we look at what we're doing, if we try and close that loop on waste, it's free money. It just comes back to you. Waste is money. And so when you put your projects together, recognize that what you're trying to do by being a watershed manager and by trying to do these nature-based solutions and green infrastructure, you're participating in the circular economy. And all 7 of Louisiana's water economy sectors are actually doing circular economy projects. We link to this in the paper. Again, really urge you to click on those links because it'll take you on journeys. We really tried to have this research tell stories that you could relate to. And as challenging as some of these things are, because we know the funding dilemma is a universal dilemma. Around the world, people are facing this same dilemma. When we went to those EPA water cluster meetings, all the water clusters' first question was, how do we pay for what we're doing? It can't always be disaster money. God help us if it is, right? But we need to do this in a way that's going to make these operations more permanent and more holistic. And this is just a really great tool and a great framing to help you look at your projects differently, look at your life differently, look at the way your economy works. And don't let that waste get passed off just onto the public sector to deal with all the time. Make sure we're addressing it. We all have a responsibility in a circular economy, just like we do with the watersheds. So the things I want you to take away from this is that there's no one source. Communities of all sizes can participate, understand, appreciate, value water, make sure we're paying for its use, make sure we're paying for the impacts that we create through stormwater fees, look at greenhouse gas emissions, and figure out how we can make sure everybody who's polluting is being measured and doing their part to remediate and mitigate what they're doing. Look at all these leverage points, the brownfields in your area, the mitigation banks, and hopefully an infrastructure bank or something like that, and really make sure your community codes are up to standard and are going to allow your communities to thrive for a long time. With that, I'll move on to questions. I'll stop sharing my screen. That's the end of my presentation. I hope I didn't go too long for y'all.
Stephen, I want to thank you for that. There's a tremendous amount of information you shared with us in a very short period of time. A couple of questions. Where can we find this information in greater detail so we can click on things that we want to learn more about?
I believe Nicolette and the team at LWI have the paper in finished form now and should be, if they haven't shared it with you yet, they should be sharing it with you very soon, if this week.
Hey, I can answer that real quick. So we send a copy to watershed coordinators to distribute. I'm not sure if it was attached to this meeting invite, maybe Pat or Adam.
I don't remember, but we can send it following this meeting. The paper is out.
Sure. And then we're just going to make a couple last minute edits and it will be on the LWI website with all the other research and regional resources that we have up.
Yeah, and I didn't emphasize this, but there's the appendix in the back lists 13 communities in a grid where you can really look and drill down. And one of our favorite examples in there is the little town of Plaquemine, Louisiana, which has a single street sweeper that has been catalytic for helping the community get involved in watershed management. There's a lot of really great stories in the paper, and I look forward to y'all getting a chance to take your time and delve into it. There are more than 100 links in the paper, and we put them in there because we think every one of them could serve a purpose for you.
Thank you. Yeah, watershed management, particularly in parishes at the end of the line like Terrebonne, can be very overwhelming, given the fact that, like this excessive rainfall we just had, it just wasn't in Terrebonne. It was in a much more region. And of course, a lot of that water tends to flow through Terrebonne. So yeah, we know we have a problem, and we've got to figure out how best to deal with it. So I think you've given us some direction, some ideas that I think would be very good for us to try to look into in much greater depth. So I thank you for that, Stephen. Does anybody else have any questions for Steve?
Yes, Mark, John Boudreaux.
Go
Hey,
ahead,
Steve.
John.
Hey, Steve, and a great presentation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
One of the things that from a local person, local level, is a lot of this and the great ideas on the different topics to discuss. But I can tell you from a experienced local person, much of this has to be enacted at the state level. Even if we want to do it at a local level, we have to have an enactment at the state level. So in your presentation, how is this being communicated to the state and ultimately the legislature?
That's going to be LWI's responsibility. At this point in time, what we were trying to do was just identify some tools, and I agree with you. Some of them are obviously broader, but we wanted to, and I'm sure LWI wanted to share it with all of y'all because we are the state, right? We're all citizens on this. We need to know these things. We need to know enough about them to be able to tell our elected officials what we think about them, what our opinions are about them, and how strongly we feel for or against them. So we're trying to share this information with everybody just to sort of create an opportunity for you to dig into the things that are of greater interest to you, the things that could apply to you as a tool, and to be able to support the statewide things as they rise to the occasion.
Okay, appreciate that.
Yeah, go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, and this is Pat Gordon. Just to support what John's saying, in Terrebonne, years ago, we tried to pass some user fees for drainage, impact, downstream improvements. And we were told by the attorney then that we didn't have the enabling legislation at the state level to impose these user fees. And we did some research on our own, and John's absolutely correct. We don't have that ability to put in user fees on development. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions of Steve Piku? Well, hearing none, Steve, I want to thank you very much for a very informative presentation. Any one of those points you could have probably talked a great deal more on. You packed a lot in there. We appreciate that. Looking forward to being able to look at the paper associated with this in much greater detail. So I think we're pretty much right on time. Again, thanks very much, Stephen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda is subcommittee update, the Region 6 Floodplain Managers Subcommittee. And Adam, I guess that's you. Right?
Yep. Hello. We had our last meeting on February 22nd. We're in the process of planning our meeting for April, just to continue discussing our action plans for our outreach, the CRS program, and the CFMs. So that's it from us.
Thank you, Adam. Any questions of Adam? All right, hearing none, we'll move to the next item on the agenda, the proposed scoring of round one regional projects. Mr. Gordon?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. The recommendations to the state would need to be submitted by July on the regional $5 million of funding out of round one. So we should receive the list from the state of eligible projects by April 31st. Staff has developed 3 options to the steering committee for recommending projects from the $5 million. So what we need to do is develop a scoring mechanism plan before April 31st. And we have a meeting April 28th, so we could certainly take a vote on that at that time. But let me just go over the 3 options. And we talked about this a little bit at the last meeting, that the one option would be just to accept the scoring of Louisiana Watershed Initiative staff and fund the top projects up to $5 million. Or option 2 would be develop our own scoring criteria with the approval of the Louisiana Watershed staff, initiative staff. Now, of course, we have to have a lengthy scoring list, and we'd have to take a vote probably on each one of the projects. It would be a lengthy process. Or 3, we could amend the scoring of the Louisiana Watershed Initiative by taking the top 5 projects from the state scoring list and then scoring these projects separated by 1, effectiveness in minimizing risks, and 2, project cost and implementation. So the question becomes, well, where do we find these at? So the next slide illustrates LWI scoring criteria. They have 5 categories, thank you, Mark, that they go by: effectiveness in minimizing risk, project costs, social benefits, enhancement of natural functions, and benefit to most impacted parishes. So if we just took the scoring from the top 2, which is effectiveness in minimizing risk and project cost and implementation, that would give us a pretty sound listing of recommended projects.
I think we have to include the benefits to most impacted parishes in there as well.
Well, we don't have any.
Okay,
Yeah, we do.
yeah, we have Ascension.
Okay.
But it was that section, Ascension, that's on the other side of the Mississippi that was impacted. It wasn't this side.
So West Mississippi, all those areas were not impacted.
No, that's correct. So anyway, that would be our recommendation, but we can open this to discussion, and anybody can call me with some suggestions, but we're gonna need to come up with some plan of action and vote on it at the next meeting.
Well, thanks, Pat. I think that's a good start to coming up with our own way to score these projects. But within, for example, effectiveness and minimizing risk, I think the risk reduction value, the upstream and downstream flood effects, and the multi-jurisdictional risk reduction benefits may be the 3 subcategories we probably need to spend a little bit, pay more attention to. And in the project cost and project implementation, I think the annual cost of the project and perhaps the project stage of development might be the things we need to focus on more. And then under social benefits, the benefit to low and moderate income populations. But other than that, I think we don't need to drill down too much more than that. We only have $5 million to play with.
Right.
How far is that going to go?
Right, it's only gonna get us a couple of
Yeah,
projects.
so, we don't need to labor excessively on every detail of these criteria. I think that we could just narrow them down a little bit. We'll have something to go on. But yeah, I think to make it fair to everybody needs to have their input, and And we do need an opportunity to vote on those projects based on those criteria. Now, how we, we're gonna quibble over something, well, it should be 19 points, it should be 20 points. I think that's a bridge we're gonna have to cross when we get to it. But I think reasonable people can come up with a reasonable way to do this. That's just my input on it. I'm open to suggestions from anybody else. Certainly, we do have these three options on the table. But I think maybe option three, maybe modify a little bit, maybe the best way for us to go. That's just my opinion. And I'm certainly open to hearing from any other members of the steering committee. You probably have some ideas. I'm sure you've given this some thoughts. So please share them with us.
Hey, this is Earl.
Go ahead, Earl.
I just wanted to bring up some stuff that we discussed in one of the other regions yesterday, and give my opinion on the whole matter. The discussion that we got into yesterday talked about timing, and especially the fact that any modification, anything other than going with the basically the state evaluation is going to require a set of justifications. I'm not saying we can't do that, but that is a bit of work we'll have to do if we choose to modify it in any way. The concern that we discussed yesterday was not necessarily the timing it would take to do that beforehand, but like, since we are in essence an ad hoc committee, depending on the length of time it takes for the project to get approved, will the committee even exist to be able to defend its decision if it doesn't go with the state criteria after? The other thing that came up that should be considered is that if we use, no matter which method we use, we need a way to fund a second project that might not be in order. In other words, let's say we use the state method, we come up with, and the top two ranked in ours are both $3 million apiece. Well, the top ranked one is an easy decision, but the second one we can't afford to fund. But maybe fourth on our list, there is one to be able to afford to fund. Well, so we need a method to be able to skip to that one because that's the next one we can afford. My opinion on it is that we should stay with the state method, just because that's a criteria that's pre-approved, and that anything we do from that, we'll have to be very careful about justifying our decisions based on a criteria other than what the state has outlined. Okay, that was my 2 cents.
Thank you, Earl. I don't think we're getting away from the state's criteria for ranking these projects. I think my suggestion is just within those categories, look at a few subcategories that may make sense for our region. But you bring up a good point, Earl, about if we only have 5 million and 2 top ranked projects are going to cost 6, what do we do? I guess we certainly don't want to leave any money on the table, as it were. So maybe by vote, we could drop down to a project that, say, 2 million, which would allow us to do at least 2 projects.
Well, it may be as simple as just stating before we even start looking at it that, we're going to pick our top ranked project, and if there's money left over, we will go to the next one we can afford to fund. That kind of thing.
That makes sense.
Well, let me add something.
Okay, and
Of course, that's why we included project costs and implementation, because we wanted to know how that project ranked on project costs. And our scoring will start off by saying not to exceed $5 million, and we will take the selection of projects not to exceed $5 million. If we run into a situation where there's 2 projects they're both $3 million, then, you know, it's gonna be, you jump automatically to the next project that would fall within the budget. And I can explain that in our school.
Okay, thank you, Pat. John, Boudreaux, did you have a comment?
Yeah, and the only comment I'll make, and is kind of following both of those comments, is the fact that what are we here for? And we were presented this at the beginning to form these committees to look at more locally instead of statewide, the Watershed Initiative, and I want to see some of the other things. The other comment about that is if we're going to work, reasonable people can work together. And the example I'll bring up is the ability, yes, I had to do one of them in application form, and you put everything in there and costs and for the entire project. But some of this work can actually get divided or segmented in stages. So you can reduce cost or cut the project in half and stage them in 2 different stages to work within your funding budget. And I think that's what we're there for, is to figure those things out. So, you know, I'm on the number 3 in this group is, you know, if we're here to do something, let's see them all. Let's figure out a way to best utilize the money, and let's all review what's in our region. There's no way we're going to know all the issues as a committee unless we sit down and look at them all. And this is just the first year's funding, and the criteria to get into some of this is going to change over the years. So we're going to see a lot more as this grows. But if we're not going to look at them holistically and figure them out and figure out the funding of the 5 million, which is not much, then we really don't need to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Okay, so let me address that.
Sure.
And we've said this numerous times, there will be multiple rounds of funding, and there will be different criteria to reach in other projects. This $5 million is just the beginning. If the whole board steering committee wants to look at all 33 applications, hey, well, I have no problem with that. But if we're going to start scoring all of them, we're going to need a subcommittee, and we will need to sit down and it's going to take a day or 2 to go through all of that. But I just want to let y'all know that there will be multiple rounds of funding to address, and these projects that are not funded will certainly continue to be in our inventory of projects. And that's why it's so important to start building that inventory of projects. I know Assumption has an engineering firm doing drainage program plus drainage study that's going to make some recommendations for future projects. That's great. That's the type of information that we're looking for, and to build that inventory of projects. But at this time, I mean, these are the 3 options, and whatever the board wants to go with is fine with me. I'm just telling you that if we start looking at all 33 applications, you're looking at a very time-consuming process. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I would have to agree with that. I think if the starting point for us would be the top 5 projects that LWI has already scored, I don't think we need to look at the other projects, the other 28 or whatever.
Yeah.
But when you look at of the 100 points in the evaluation criteria for round 1 that LWI came up, 44% of those have to do with effectiveness and minimizing risk. And I think that's what we're looking for, but of that 44 points, almost 50% of that has to do with risk reduction value. The other subcategories underneath that criteria only get very, very few points, 2, 3, 4 at the most. And I think we can sort of cut to the chase, as it were, by relying on the values that contain a few more points, like risk reduction, multi-jurisdictional risk reduction benefits, and things like that. I think that's where we can start, and I don't think we need to look at all the projects on the list. I think we can assume that the 5 projects that are in the top 5 for our region have been vetted very well. I mean, it's not to say we can't take a quick look at the rest of those 28 projects, 33. And maybe we can ask, well, why didn't this project make it into the top 5? But given the fact that we've got a lot of things to accomplish in relatively little time to do it in, because there are other things that we've got to consider as a steering committee. Let's see what happens with it. And I think the option number 3 that Pat's talked about, and we can modify that a little bit, but I think that may be the most effective and efficient way for us to proceed.
Okay, yeah, and just to reiterate, Mark, what we're here for. I heard John here say what we're here for. Okay, the number 1 task of the steering committee is to develop a coalition. That's the number 1 task, so that we can go to the legislature with a governance that could be supported by all. That's the most important element of what we're here for. 2 is to make a selection of projects based off of round 1. Now, future rounds, probably the coalition will be making recommendations of those projects. And number 3 is to develop an inventory of projects, which I brought up at every meeting, asking individuals to submit an inventory of projects. So if you ask what you're doing here, those are the 3 things, those elements that the steering committee is here for. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
Hey, Pat and Mark, can I say a couple things as well?
Only if you want to.
Well, I just wanted to, this is Nicolette from OCD. I kind of want to go off what Pat is saying. Pat is exactly right about what you all are here for. But I just want to boil down this process and the round 1 projects, just so because we can get kind of in the weeds a little bit. But basically, we received funding and we are allocating that funding to projects to lower our flood risk. The first tranche of that funding, round 1, is intended by the state to fund and implement high reward, low risk projects. So that's projects that can result in a large amount of flood risk reduction and are also low risk in that they are potentially ready to implement right away, or they would not have any kind of downstream or upstream impact. Now, to get to that, the state developed and worked really hard to develop a rubric that would essentially identify and score those high reward, low risk projects. So that is the state's intent on this first tranche of funding, and that scoring matrix is how we get there. Now, while we are working at the regional level, we understand that that regions may have unique circumstances that they may want to diverge a little bit away from that, the state's intent of round one. And they may want to fund, for example, a project that is a certain type, like a buyout. Let's say there are some buyouts that are needed that have been long overdue. And so that is the goal of your region. So we just want to make sure that we know that you are going to prioritize that type of project or a project in this area. We want to know that priority that you have before we send you the list of projects, because we don't want necessarily you to create your priorities after seeing the projects. But if your priorities are indeed aligned with the state's, there's really no need to go through that process. And you may, also want to fund a project that is effective in lowering risk and is also a low risk project. So that's kind of the basis for this conversation. Do you kind of agree with that intent of this first tranche of funding? Or do you want to maybe use this funding to fund projects that may have different priorities? And we're enabling you to do that because we want to make sure, this regional process is totally new. Us coming together as a region, working across political boundaries is new. So we want to also, you guys are kind of like guinea pigs in a sense of looking at project prioritization at the regional watershed scale. So this isn't for naught. This is a practice. And I think maybe going through this process might inform your recommendation even for your coalition and how your coalition is involved with project management, project funding. So granted, it's kind of confusing, but I just wanted to give that like high level, broad picture of how this process fits into the bigger picture. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Nicolette. In a sense, I think you may be putting the cart before the horse.
Hey, Mark, last comment, and we're on meeting 11 and haven't seen a project or illustration of the first shovel being done.
I'll get to that, John. That's what I meant by putting the cart before the horse. We got 16 parishes in the whole part in Region 6. I don't know what the priorities are in Point Quebec. I can speak pretty well for Terrebonne, but that's it. So without having the list of projects, all of everything on that, there may be projects on the list that the state LWI has or OCD has gone through and prioritized based on the global picture, but there may be things on there that would be a priority for another parish. Now, we're going to have to figure out a way to sort through all that stuff to come up with our own priorities for Region 6. And I see that, squabbling over $5 million is sort of pointless in a way, but I know there's going to be other rounds of funding, which some of us may not have any hand in, but I don't think we can make decisions without seeing everything on the table. So I would not want to come up with our priorities without having seen the projects that were submitted. It would give us an opportunity to look at those maybe with a different set of eyes than was done by LWI, more in tune perhaps with what we want to accomplish for this region. I don't know, I don't like making decisions in the dark, and to a certain extent, I feel like we're being asked to do that. Those are just my thoughts on it. Maybe somebody else has got a different take on it. That's not to criticize LWI in any way with the work that OCD has done. I just think we have a little gap here in understanding that we need to figure out how we're going to proceed. Pat, did you want to throw something in there? Anybody else?
Well, I'm sure you're referring to future phases regarding our priorities, not
This phase,
this phase.
Why not?
because this phase has to follow the guidelines. So we're making a recommendation to, Nicolette, tell me if I'm wrong. We're not technically selecting the project. We're making the recommendation for the state to select. So it ultimately still has to fall under their low risk, high reward concept. We can't go and make a completely different scoring criteria. It's still based off of, has to have that end result.
I'm not saying we do that, but we may interpret a project that did not score very well initially from a local standpoint as a high reward, low risk project that didn't score too well initially. I'd like to see the entire list of projects, and speaking for as the chairman, I would kind of think that everybody else on this steering committee would want to see that as well before we make a decision, before we make our recommendation.
Now, well, the state won't do that.
I agree.
We do have the list that was in the inventory, so you'd have the name of the project and a general idea. That would be the only thing we're allowed to have before, but we're not sure who actually submitted from that list.
Well,
Hey, Mark, to your point, I see where you're coming from. I just want to let you know, the state made this rubric without knowing what applications are going to come in. The state is saying these are the types of projects that will score high. These are the projects that will score low. You submit your proposals. So, the state's criteria were put together without seeing the project. So in a similar way, you all need to think about your priorities. If you indeed want to use the rubric and fund those type of projects that score high on the state's rubric, you can. But if you have a particular priority that is calling you, I guess, then we just want you all to discuss that and provide that justification to the state.
so you want us to do that without seeing the top 5 projects?
And the reason for that is we just need to make sure that that it's transparent, that that your prioritizations don't change based on the application pool that you see. Because if you convert it to the state level, you all probably wouldn't think it would be right for the state to change its scoring method after seeing the projects. You want a predictable scoring justification
Okay.
in advance.
All right, so you want Region 6 to develop a rubric, to use your language, use your word, for us to rank the projects. Now, I don't think we're going to steer too far away from what has been done by you guys, but I think we may be able to foreshorten that list a little bit, list of criteria, to look at the things that we may judge to be more important in terms of risk reduction, high risk, high reward, low risk. I'm sure Nicolette and we'll muddle through it some kind of way. But what you're telling me, if I understand it correctly, is we need to come up with our way to rank the projects before we get the top 5 from you. Is that correct?
For the whole list,
The whole.
the whole list.
All the awarded lists.
I want to just make sure and clarify that you don't need to rank projects. You can, but you don't have to. You don't need to, create a new scoring system, but you can. But if it's a simple, just priority, a different priority than what you see outlined in the state's scoring matrix, if you have a different, thanks for the slide. If there is something in your region that is more of a priority, we want you to just identify that and enable you all to make your recommendation based on that priority. It's something that you should determine now as opposed to after getting the project list.
All right. Adam, did you say this?
Hey, this is Earl. I got a comment.
Go ahead, Earl.
Just to put it more bluntly, I asked the same question in another region and then in an offline conversation. And to put it more bluntly, that helped me understand it, was that they wanted to make sure your priorities were like not published, but decided ahead of time so that no region could write their priorities based on, we want to fund this project, so let's write priorities based on where this one will rank high. In other words, so that it's all the, the priorities are separate things from the projects. So that's why they wanted to see them ahead of time. That was my only comment.
Okay, I can buy that.
All right, Mark, one more comment. So as Nicolette said, and I'm just going to go back on in the statement about elevation acquisitions, I can tell you from a local government standpoint, when we deal with that on hazard mitigation and so forth, local government really believes that they can come up with projects that can serve a large population group for the money instead of spending it on maybe 3 or 4 elevation acquisitions. And she just indicated that that's a high priority group. And you can use repetitive loss and all this other stuff to try to get those applications qualified. But as a local government representative and following my local government, we want to be able to look at this and look at those benefits in a different mindset than what we get from FEMA and what we get from the state. And I think that's what we're trying to do, is to get another perspective and and go and differ from the different grant programs out there now. So that's my comment. I think we need to be able to look at them and discuss them with this group and hopefully come up with some recommendations to submit without going through a detailed process.
Yeah, John, I've been wrestling with this for some time, but I think what we're trying to do is we all have a decentralized mindset. We represent different parishes, so our mindset is decentralized. But now we have to look at things from a more centralized standpoint in terms of a regional watershed. And I think that's potentially the sticking point. Now, yes.
But I want to know what's going on at Poincaré Parish, because I deal with I can tell you a whole lot about assumption. I don't know about these other places. I would love to hear if we have common problems or not.
Yeah, I hear
Hey
what
guys,
you're saying.
this is Michelle, and I think that what John just said is the common problems, but also the common goals. Like if that's the thing that I keep hearing through this conversation is our region's goal nature-based solutions? Is it mitigating rep loss prop? Like what is the thing that's rising to the top, and have we ever defined that? And when will we define that? Or are we just gonna not define it?
That's not one of our goals at this time. Our goals are to develop a coalition that will develop that mission later. I
I see.
don't think that's part of our task for this year.
Yeah, this steering committee is gonna go away, eventually, and it's gonna be supplanted by the coalition, which we have to define and make that recommendation, but we're not there yet. So I
Hey,
guess
Hey, this
Yeah.
is Earl though. She is right. If we're going to write our own criteria though, we have to have some discussion about those priorities.
So I guess what they're trying to say is the breakdown of the if we want to use the scoring of the watershed, out of these 5, what is the actual main criteria we want to look at? Is actually effectiveness and minimizing risk and project costs? Or do we want to look at social benefits to it too? Is that kind of what you're going at, Michelle? Is based off of here, these right here, what do we want to prioritize?
Well, I'm just kind of wondering, like, maybe if I'm guessing that's the max points off to the side. Like, if the state decided that 44 points was for effectiveness, well, maybe we would have gone 30 on that and done 20 on social. But I don't think we can arbitrarily just start putting numbers next to this until we really know what is like, if project cost and implementation, if that's our number one thing, then it may need more points. Or maybe the points don't even need to change, and it's the way that they scored them, the way that the state interpreted this person's application and gave them X amount of points. Perhaps if we're a local government representatives and we're looking at it like, there's no way that this meets that many points. And I think that kind of goes with John's comments of like, who at the state scored it, and are we just going to accept that scoring, or would we want to just rescore it from the lens that we come from? There's just a lot of conversation happening about this. So.
I do see a big potential, Michelle, for a lot of disagreement here. But I'm sure Mr. Gordon's going to have it all worked out for us for the next meeting.
April 28th. I'll tell you what, as soon as I put something together, I'll send it out to all the steering committee members and ask for input.
Yeah, and okay, we can
do that next week.
We can go with that, but it will be important for each steering committee member to take a hard look at that and offer their comments to Pat, and Pat's going to share it with everybody.
Correct.
And we'll send it out a week before the meeting, the final one, to just be approved.
Right.
So the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks would be discussing a certain plan.
Hey, this is Amanda. I just kind of wanted to follow up with what Michelle said. I agree with pretty much everything she said, and I think it's important that, I guess when looking at the 3 options that we have to choose from at this point, like I would be wary of like limiting the projects that we're looking at or given. Like I don't feel comfortable, for me to accept the scoring outright, I don't think that fits what we're trying to do. But if number 3, the top 5 projects almost seems like an arbitrary number. For me, I would feel more comfortable like getting the whole list and just being able to, like Michelle said, evaluate, if a project for whatever reason gets more points than maybe we think it should, evaluate why that is.
Thank you, Amanda. One way to do this, just one way, would be to take the list of criteria that were developed by LWI and take all the projects that were submitted for round one for our region and individually score those using that criteria. And then we come together, and there may be some projects that end up being common to everybody, or at least a majority of people, and maybe that's one of our priority projects. Just trying to make this thing as equitable as possible, but I don't know. We'll have to rely on Mr. Gordon to.
So what you're saying is pretty much we re-rank every project. That's like what you're saying? Like it would be almost option two.
We just do our own scoring.
Yeah.
Yeah, we use a set of criteria to do our own scoring on each project. And it would all come together, and there may be some projects that in the top 5 that are common to a majority of the members. And
What do
so,
you mean by common?
well, it means like this project ended up being on 10 representatives list in their top 5. Okay, well, that's a project that apparently has got a lot of support and scored pretty good. So, that's one. Now we could go through an iterative process like that, and it's kind of time consuming, but time is something we don't have a lot of.
Yeah, because that would be 16
Yeah.
people having to rank 33.
Right.
Do we know that there was 33 applications received?
There's 33 that were eligible to submit. I don't know who actually submitted them. We don't know that until we get
We do know there was 190
that overall.
applications that were submitted to the state out of like 300,
Mhm.
over 300. So it was like 110, 120 applications that were not submitted. So we do know that.
Well, it's like I've heard several times in the last month, don't overthink it. And maybe I'm guilty of that right now, overthinking, which sometimes I tend to do. All right, look, I don't want to keep everybody here forever, but is there any more discussion? Where we're going to leave this is Pat's going to attempt to bail us out on this and put something together that we'll have an opportunity to comment on. So, does anybody have any further points to make under this agenda item? John, one more shot.
No, I said enough.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Then we know we have some direction on that. So now we're going to move to the next item on the agenda, which is outreach and communication. And I know Pat's done a lot of work on that. He's going to talk about the plan, what's been completed, the meetings, and what needs to be done. So, Mr. Gordon, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you. Well, the state's provided us an outreach template that we can utilize to move forward. And basically, it's to find out from the different communities and stakeholders if they know about the watershed efforts. And if they do know about the watershed efforts, then do you know about our recommendations on the watershed? Also, we want to know what are the stakeholders that we're missing out on. So what I've done is I've wanted to start at the top, and I've sent out emails to all the steering committee members asking that you get together with the chief elected official, that we can sit down, have a meeting, and make sure that the chief elected official is aware of the watershed effort, our provisionary recommendations, and who would he like for us to contact. Also, we would like to bring to his attention that we like to make a presentation to the parish council or the parish police chief. We'd like to go to the levee district, the drainage districts. We'd like to go to the nonprofits like BetNet or South Louisiana Wetlands Consortium, I believe they're called. Discovery Center. I mean, there's a number of nonprofits out there. So far, I've received a response back from Iberville, Jefferson, Lafourche, Terrebonne, and West Baton Rouge Parish. And we had meetings with the chief elected officials from those 5 entities, those parishes, and we're going to run off of that and find out what other agencies in their parishes they'd like for us to reach out to. Now, we have the talking points on our website. We have met with OCD's consultant, Henry and Associates, that are putting together some public notices for us. We put together the talking points, of course, that I sent out to everyone, and they're upgrading those talking points. We will be putting together a PowerPoint presentation to provide to the parish councils and police juries and levy districts and nonprofits. We will also be sending out on our constant contacts the talking points, and also getting together with all the official journals in each one of the parishes. So that's part of our outreach efforts. At the next meeting on April 28th, I'm jumping ahead of myself. On August 28th, we hope to give you a list of all the meetings that we attended and all the backup information that we've gotten from the consultants and the newspaper advertisements, and all the outreach effort will be laid out. Now, I just want to let you know, if I don't hear back from the steering committee members next week, I will be going ahead and contacting the chief elected official myself. We did that initially when we started the steering committee. Me and Kevin Boulanger went and met with each one of the chief elected officials in each one of the parishes to explain what was taking place. But I'm giving the opportunity to the steering committee member to sit down with the chief elected official and explain what's been going on this past year. But if you're for some reason unable to do that, we're going to go ahead and contact, and we will invite you to the meeting. Does anybody have any questions about that outreach plan so far?
Let me comment on that. We had previously decided, rather than have the consultant run all these meetings, that it would be much better for this effort if the appointed steering committee member for that each respective parish sort of take the lead with Mr. Garden, because it sort of puts after all, each member was appointed by his or her respective parish. So I think it would be appropriate for that person to sort of take the lead in the outreach with Mr. Gordon. It sort of puts a face on what we're trying to accomplish here.
And also, I just want to let you know that it's not just outreach, it's also taking in feedback from the elected officials, from the general public. When we hold these meetings at the police jury and council, we want to hear back from the council. We want to hear back from the police jury. We want to hear from the general public on our provisional recommendations. So, and all of that will be documented as part of the outreach plan.
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to make a presentation to each governing authority, council, police jury in each parish. But before that's done, the chief elected officer in that parish needs to be briefed first. And then if you're going to do a PowerPoint at a council meeting or a police jury meeting, my suggestion is limit the number of slides, maybe to 5, and do most of the talking with those slides.
Yes.
Because the time is limited sometimes. Does anybody have any comments on this agenda item? Okay, well, here it does. Then, do any members of the committee have any comments in general? Don't disappoint me, Joe. Well, hearing none, next item on the agenda has to do with closeout. So are there any members of the public on this
Yeah, you can keep going.
speed who may want to make a comment? All right. Pat, you want to talk about the key dates and upcoming events that we need to be aware of?
Well, I think we've already gone over one of those, that April 31st, the state is going to want to have our round one scoring criteria submitted to them by then. So, the April 28th meeting is critical. And also, we'll be making round one recommendations in the summer. But in the meantime, hopefully we'll hear something from the state, May on the $60 million that will be awarded. Yeah, May 2021. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Pat. Adam, you got anything to add?
Nope.
Well, I think we had a good discussion today. We know what we got to do in the meantime. So before the next meeting, that's some work to do. Okay. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
It's Earl, you got it.
Thank you, Earl. It's a second.
Second.
Michelle, I'll second.
Who seconded?
Michelle.
Michelle, okay, thank you, Michelle. Are there any objections to adjournment? Hearing none, we are adjourned for 11:45. Thank you very much. See you all next time.
Guys.